So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 90, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Colin Gardiner, who's a chief revenue officer at Outdoorsy and Roamly. So Outdoorsy is the largest marketplace for booking RVs, which also just launched Roamly as their new insurance offering. So prior to Outdoorsy, Colin led product at Ancestry.com and Tripping.com, so he has some really great marketplace experience. So this is a really great chat with Colin, where we got to learn more about Outdoorsy as a marketplace, did a deep dive into it, got to learn more about how they also launched Roamly as their insurance offering, and had a great Q&A for those on the chat. So really enjoyed this conversation and know you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Colin, welcome to the group chat. This has been a long time in the works, so it's definitely great to have you join us here today. So, Outdoorsy comes up quite regularly in the community, and I'm really interested to learn more about how you guys also launched Roamly as an insurance offering. So really excited to, dive into things with you. Before we do, though, I think it might be great if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background for those that don't know you.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to share, and really great to be chatting with everyone today. And nice to see a few friendly faces on here as well. So softball questions from the audience, obviously. But no, great chatting. So my background, before tech, really my background is econ, math, stats. I worked at the Federal Reserve for a number of years doing modeling and kind of econometrics, big data before they called it big data. So that's kind of always been my thought process in the world, is like cost benefit analysis and things like that. So it's been the flavor of thinking. But anyway, I applied to grad school and was like, submitted it and was like, actually don't think I want to go. And I was living in San Francisco at the time. This is 15 years ago. So just as things were really starting to take off. And I thought, well, I should apply to some of these tech companies and see if anyone will hire like someone with this data analytics background. And that was just as all of that kind of data side of data science piece of it was taking off, and got a few job interviews right away. So that was exciting, and that got me right into tech. Actually working on bidding algorithms before Kensho Marin existed for LTV and things like that. And so naturally from there progressed into A/B testing, which I got into product development. And this was at a company called Just Answer, which was like a professional marketplace. So it was like Q&A website where you could get connected with a professional, doctor, lawyer, whatever it may be. It was really kind of a all-in-one. Still exists, still out there, but obviously verticalization has kind of disrupted that space. But from there, went to Ancestry.com, where I ran a number of product teams, really working on everything buy button forward. DNA product was a big notable launch that we did there. It's a few $1 billion, I think now, which is pretty cool. And then from there, really wanted to get back to the startup roots, and ran product analytics at a company called Tripping.com, vacation rental marketplace aggregator. And then from there, still love travel after that, and wanted to kind of get back in on the ground floor again. And so joined Outdoorsy, which is essentially a marketplace for RV rentals. So I think that covers the whole thing.
Yeah, that's certainly quite the background, and thanks for sharing with us. So going back to the to the early days at Ancestry.com and Tripping.com, what were you kind of working on there, and maybe what were some of the kind of challenges with them both as marketplaces?
Yeah, so I think as we all know with marketplaces, Ancestry may not seem like a marketplace on the veneer, but realistically, what it is like you're connecting people that want to perform research on their family history with data. Right. And you are essentially aggregating data providers. And the real asset there, the supply side of the business, is access to things like census records and things like that. And so digitizing and providing a conduit to put all this information online and then connecting people with that data. That's what, Ancestry does. And that was like the biggest challenge, was always like, how do you connect people without them doing a ridiculous amount of research to find everything themselves? And realistically there, as we launched the DNA product, it was, really about providing more supply of data, right? And the more you do there, the stickier retention is, and the more usage and everything that goes up. So that was like the big thing there. Tripping, was a vacation rental space was interesting because I joined like third employee-ish. And, it was really as HomeAway had been around, but Airbnb was taking off meaningfully. And so it was, early on, one of the big insights that we had was that, while Airbnb and HomeAway had a lot of inventory, most vacational transactions were still on the tail, right? And there was a lot of disparate supply. And so I think you'll see this common thread as we think about marketplaces, and at least my experience is that aggregation of supply and really where the repeat behavior is typically one of the biggest problems in marketplaces, but also the greatest growth unlocks when you get it. And so, it's like I look back through all these challenges. It's always been, how do you get, the right supply at the right place at the right time, the right quality.
Yeah, certainly, and that was also a really interesting kind of time with the travel market and the competitors, like you mentioned with HomeAway and Airbnb. So were there any kind of like big learnings at your time there at tripping.com that you've then taken with you to Outdoorsy?
Many. I've made many mistakes in my career, so lots of good learnings from that. I think overall, as you do marketplaces and as you do startups before, you kind of learn what's important, like what really has high signal to noise. And for me, I think a lot of what I took away from tripping and working in the vacation rental space was how important like owning the whole vertical was. And so this is something you see that we'll maybe talk a little bit more about Outdoorsy, is that, being able to own from the supply, calendar all the way to final booking and reservation is really important. And so a lot of what you saw in the vacation rental space was people had already built property management softwares, then they built booking engines, and then they built, essentially classified sites. And then there was aggregators on top of that. And it was a very disparate space that led to essentially bad user experiences. And so at Outdoorsy, kind of like one of the things that I was really excited about joining was that space didn't really have anyone that had serviced the supply side to build a property management booking engine, all the things to run their business. And so one of the I think things that I saw where there's a lot of value creation to be had was, how do you quickly as a business verticalize all the way from the supply side all the way to demand side and own that? And I think you'll see that as a core theme with Outdoorsy, is that, Outdoorsy is a marketplace very similar to Airbnb. And there's additional products beneath that, one being Wheelbase, which is a SaaS business to run your rental fleet on, and then ultimately insurance and other offerings, which allow you to run your business. So we can get into more of that, but that was what excited me in particular was, how do you, get into an early opportunity and verticalize the entire thing and own that? Because owning the calendars, which means owning the accuracy and the bookings, is the key to success in travel in particular.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm sure it was interesting to see that kind of, evolve as far as when it came to like the marketplace's kind of trends at that point in time. So that's a great transition into Outdoorsy, so what led you to joining the Outdoorsy team?
Yeah, obviously met with the founders, great folks, like people that, really passionate about what they're doing, had lived in their RV for a while and identified this opportunity. And that was inspiring to me, a bit of the, learning as you do method. And, overall, like just excited to work with people that have been through startups before and built successful companies. So for me, a lot of why I do what I do is, work with great people that, want to be successful. But also businesses, I like businesses that have sneaky large TAMs, right? They're like essentially non-obvious. I think that's where, high optionality is for, value creation in terms of you putting your time and effort to, driving high equity value and things like that, and also revenue. And travel in particular, it is awesome. Why? Because people want to do it as much as humanly possible. Like, you don't have to convince anyone to buy your product, right? Like, people want to do it if they had unlimited time and money. And so travel is like one of those great categories where it's just not like, in the conversation, it's like people want to do it, right? It's just a matter of whether it's the best option with how much time and energy and time and money they have. So that means great unit economics, but also competitive.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so I guess most of us here, I would say, are familiar with Outdoorsy, but for those that aren't, could you kind of give us like a high level overview of it, and then maybe even touch on some unique aspects of it as a marketplace?
Yeah, for sure. So For those that aren't aware, Outdoorsy is a marketplace for providing your RV for rent, but also for people to come and rent it. Much like the vacation rental space, where you may have a second home and you aren't using it, and during that fallow time you want to put it to work. RVs are very similar. They're used for 2 to 3 weeks out of the year, and then they sit in people's driveway, storage unit, wherever it may be, and they're not utilized. And so, given that, there is an asset that is essentially underutilized and can be put to work to produce revenue and income for people. And in particular, RVs are interesting because you can get a second loan on them, and it's a depreciating asset. So you may be paying a mortgage on something that's losing value. So there's a lot of impetus for people to not, be underwater in their mortgage and therefore, or their loan, I should say, and rent it out and use it. And so providing that option for people is a big unlock in general.
Yeah, you did mention, big opportunity, right? Like a much bigger market than might be up here. So, how big is the market for RV rentals?
Yeah, I think the way to think about it is like how much supply is out there. I haven't the most recent stat, but I think it's roughly 1 in 7 American households owns an RV, right? Which to me is nuts, right? It's big, right? And it's just not. It escapes the eye. Like I said, it's a sneaky large TAM in general, and it's that's why I like it. There's more people that own them than you might think.
Yeah.
Those people need to put them to work.
Yeah, certainly sounds like it. Yeah, so I guess also, like what sense of scale are you guys at today?
In terms of, great scale. I think, the most recent, like in March of last year, we crossed $1 billion in cumulative GMV. So, awesome business, growing quickly. That, ultimately in the past couple of years has actually been a great travel option for people, especially through COVID. And so, that scale has continued to grow rather quickly, but also it's kind of, adoption and people's interest in being outdoors has also become more and more important. And so what we're seeing is just a secular trend where people want to do local travel and be outdoors. And the best way to do that often is an RV rental. So it's been exciting that it's more in the conversation now, and that pretty much every friend I have had in the past, 3 years has asked me, should I go do one with my family or friends? And so it's just great to see that coming from more of a niche travel option to a mainstream travel option, that is basically now, hotels, vacation rentals, and RV rentals.
Yeah, I'm also hearing it quite frequently in my my friend circle too. So that was really cool. So kind of like going back though to the earlier days of Outdoorsy. I'd love to learn a little bit more about maybe how it's kind of evolved. As you guys have scaled, and also too, I did want to ask about specifically Wheelbase Pro, which is kind of like your your SaaS offering. If we can maybe learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, of course. So I think there's always the chicken or the egg problem in the marketplace, right? Do you start with the supply side? Do you start with the demand side? And honestly, how do you bootstrap it? No matter how much money you have or all these things, it's you want to show up to a party where there's people at the party, and that's the problem to solve. And so I think there's a couple ways to look at it. You can try and start with the peer-to-peer side of it, right? What are the inherent advantages of that? Those people do want to rent their supply out. Inherent disadvantages are they're very disparate and they're one by one, and they're not necessarily running a business today. One of the advantages of going after the people that already are running this business, they're basically doing what you want to do with your marketplace, is that A, they have a lot of supply. B, they don't necessarily need your business to be interested and to keep them alive, right? And C, they're running a service, so they tend to be higher quality in general in terms of they're running a business, so they want to have repeat customers and great experiences. And so one of the things that I would stress that was successful for Outdoorsy was building this software, which is free for the use, or it has been in the past, for people that were running their fleets to essentially have management of their fleet, booking engines, websites, all of it, but then also to be able to put their inventory on Outdoorsy and get bookings. And so what that meant for us was that as you drove demand, you already had supply on that was instantly bookable and readily available and high quality. But that also meant when we started advertising the peer-to-peer side, they showed up, there was already inventory on the site. And therefore, they felt like this was trusted and something they could, want to be a part of. And we had sufficient demand to, continue to bootstrap it. So I think as as founders of marketplaces, have to think of, strategically, what's your wedge of how you get it going? Because I think that's the key, the chicken or the egg problem, as always. And you have to, I think line up with your, your marketplace in particular and the dynamics around it, and think about how to go after it. So a big thing I would also say is that insurance wasn't a thing for people that were renting their own RVs out. And they were doing it on Craigslist. They didn't necessarily have like a, rental period insurance available. If they did, it was very expensive. And so a big unlock that we found, in particular for the peer-to-peer side, was us providing the insurance during the rental period. And doing that, was essentially the liquidity unlock so that people could make bookings, trust that their RV, if it got in an accident, would be covered, and realistically, create that liquidity in the marketplace that can allow demand to thrive, and then help the business grow.
Yeah, that's a great transition right into to Roamly, I guess. Yeah, could you share a little bit more about what led to Roamly? I know you just kind of briefly touched on it. So.
Yeah, our Jeff Cavins, the founder of Outdoors, or one of the founders of Outdoorsy, he always is like impresses upon us to talk to customers like as much as humanly possible, and I literally can't say that enough myself. Validate everything you're doing with customers, right? I mean, that is just important, and it's a muscle that if you get reflexive is pretty easy to do. But part of that was, we have a large community of owners that was, I think, big part of success of Outdoorsy too. Yes, as Shane said, start with the customer, work backwards. And that community, as we started going in and, talking to them, learning, was that people were renting out their RVs, and we started to see instances where people would be dropped from their insurance. And so what the interesting thing about the peer-to-peer side was that personal insurance is non-commercial insurance, right? Like that, the whole point is it's not used for commercial activity. And so people's personal insurance products have a commercial exclusion clause in them, saying if you use your RV for commercial use, it will not be covered in the event of a claim, right? And so, and that's your personal use, not like they got in an accident and they found out that it was on a marketplace, they would not cover you. And so that was a light bulb moment for us. That was like a clear need and what I would call a liquidity barrier for the marketplace, right? And I think this is really key for people in marketplaces that are managing them, is to identify your liquidity barriers and try to essentially remove them, right? These are all of the reasons not to provide supply on a marketplace, right? And try and itemize and remove those as much as humanly possible. And so this was a big one for us. And it took a lot of time, like, to be perfectly honest, like, insurance industry does not move quickly, and going and convincing people that there needs to be a new insurance product to allow for people to let other people take their RV out. It's kind of like the Airbnb thing of, let's let random people sleep on our couch kind of thing, right? It's like, at first it sounds crazy, but now we found ourselves here and we have launched Roamly, which is an insurtech business. It does more than just personal lines insurance, but one of the big innovations that we've been working on is providing best-in-class RV insurance that allows you to put your RV on a RV market, RV sharing marketplace, and rent it out. And so that's a big innovation for us, and also an easy sell to people, right, that are coming on. And so we obviously want to have every RV on our marketplace be insured, and safe, and covered. And in us providing that, we can kind of help ensure that happens.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing more with us on that. So a lot of founders here in the community are thinking about how they can, offer additional kind of value adds or value props as a marketplace, such as insurance, right? But it sounds like it took you quite some time though to initially offer insurance and then launch Roamly. So could you share a little bit more about like what that time period was like and what all went into actually kind of rolling this out?
Yeah, and I should break down insurance. There's a couple of flavors within this. One is the insurance during the rental period. right? And so that was pretty early on that we figured that out. It was not easy. I mean, Jeff pitched many insurance companies, and again, maybe sounded crazy to most people. And we probably, in hindsight, right, like that was like the linchpin to all of the business, at least in hindsight. And so that was one type of insurance, is just making sure the rental period's covered, such that the biggest like question mark for on the supply side of providing your RV for rent is, will it be covered if someone else is driving it, it's in an accident, right? Will I get my money back, so to speak? And then the other flavor is on the personal line insurance. So think, you own a car, you get your Geico, your Allstate, Progressive, maybe it's Metro Mile, whatever it may be, your insurance policy. That one is where that's taken a bit longer road, because that is it's a filed policy, and so therefore you have to do it in every state. So there's just inherent idiosyncrasies to filing insurance policies in all 50 states, since it's state mandated. But yeah, so that, in terms of like value add, that's where we spent a lot of time and effort. Insurance became like a very great way for us to monetize, one, the rental period. So the renter buys the rental insurance. We also provide in the flow trip cancellation insurance. So like you would with airlines or things like that, but also interior damage insurance. Interior damage insurance, I'm sure most people have rented a vacation rental before. The security deposit, right? You put some security deposit down. You're like, oh my God, I like broke a window, or I don't know, did something. Am I going to get my security deposit back, right? Or less? Well, the interior damage insurance is essentially an offset to the security deposit. I'd rather just pay an upfront cost to have a certain amount of coverage. And I'd say one of the insights for people as you think about monetization is like, your cost centers are oftentimes your revenue centers. You just have to flip it on your head and how you think about it. I mean, I think the best example, one of the most profitable examples of this is Amazon with AWS, right? They just kept getting more and more servers to obviously support their growing business. But then they realized, well, look, if you turn this on its head and use this capacity that you have here, you can actually make it a revenue center. Because people often think about how to embed it and provide it free of cost or charge to people. That may not necessarily be the best strategy overall. And so I would encourage people to think about how you take those cost centers and turn it into a revenue center.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So I'm kind of curious to learn more though. So you have, Wheelbase Pro, you have your peer-to-peer kind of marketplace with Outdoorsy and also Roamly, right? So there's quite a bit going on, as a company. So what is your kind of team like, and maybe like the org structure?
Yeah, I mean, overall, we have people focusing on all portions of those business. Outdoorsy rolls up to the Inc. level. And the marketplace is run as a marketplace. Wheelbase is run more as a SaaS software, traditional sales, outbound calling, things like that. But at the end of the day, it is still about, the supply on the marketplace and the flywheel of driving bookings, right? And so we kind of holistically still think about the business as, how do we take owners and pros and drive them as many bookings as humanly possible. And this manifests, right, in terms of, what I look at a lot for the health of the business is the slope of your like LTV over time going up, right? Are you driving more bookings per owner more quickly? And that is, and you can take that to any business, revenue, whatever you want to, your unit of conversion might be. And you want to see over time, as those monthly cohorts, is that slope curvature going up. And then also you're on the y-axis there, you're, like the point you're starting at being higher and higher, meaning your first month, the average amount they're making higher and higher. And so, as we think about running the business, that's a lot of what we're trying to do is like, let's get owners and pros more bookings more quickly and more often. And so that holistically, the organization may, have some silos around, you have this duty to serve this customer set and this and that. But at the end of the day, if they're not coming together into this like harmony of driving more bookings to more owners more quickly over time, then, it's not a success. And so the insurance piece of that is also adds LTV, but also increases liquidity in the marketplace. It allows us to convert more owners and bring more owners on, and also make sure that they're compliant as well.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. So what is what's a day-to-day like in your role as a chief revenue officer?
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit different than maybe like a B2B SaaS chief revenue officer. Realistically, what I'm focused on a lot is the unit economics of the business. I think marketplaces in particular, you have phases, right? Number one is the chicken and the egg problem. Can you get liquidity in your marketplace and can it get going? So that flywheel starts going. Great, you have transactions, you have all that. You've got some basic idea of how to grow, and you need to grow both sides, right? At some point you get to scale where people want to throw fuel on the fire to make it grow really fast. And so at that juncture is where, someone in the business really needs to start focusing on LTV to CAC and contribution margin. And so for us at Outdoorsy, I joined originally as chief product officer, and that's been my background traditionally. But after our Series C, really started focusing on unit economics of the business. And so that's what the role entitles. And so very focused on revenue generation, but also driving margin and really segmentation of the business and thinking about, the marketplace in a way where we can essentially drive margin from every transaction and do it scalably. So that's what I do on the day to day, and that's why I look at LTV curves a lot, but also on the cost side, right? And understanding which segments of the business drive value. I think I've said RV, right? So it just seems holistically that's what we rent out. But RVs has many categories. You may or may not know this, but there's drivable RVs, motorized, you might call them. So like vans, the giant white boxes, all the different flavors, the Class A's, all those things. But there's also towable ones where you take your own car and tow it. And those two sets of, just at that categorization behave very differently. And so as you get to scale in a marketplace, it really behooves you to start slicing and dicing your supply side to understand demand side, if it makes sense, to understand those revenue behaviors and cost behaviors within those buckets, because those will be your big growth levers ultimately for margin, and also for growth of the business, is identifying which pieces of supply are underutilized, and ultimately you may be able to build product to grow them faster. So for example, like one of the things we identified looking at our unit economics is that trailers, like in the past, converted not as well as motorized. People want to take camper vans out, right? And they can just show up and drive it away. Well, towable inventory may be great in Texas, but it's not great when people live in San Francisco and California and don't have a tow hitch, right? And so a big unlock for our business was, how can we just get the owner to deliver it to you or to a campground or things like that? And so as you think about your business, it's how do you unlock from the product perspective more services and more value such that you can take this underutilized piece of supply, which most marketplaces have to have underutilization for them to exist, and make it more utilized.
Yeah, so I was actually going to ask about that, how kind of like standardized like the, needs and typical use cases, I guess, for kind of like supply would be. So I'm glad you kind of, covered that. On that note too, I'm sure there's a lot of different kind of nuances on like a per market level, when it comes to like location. So, how many markets do you operate in? Is it just across the US right now, or?
Internationally, we're US is, obviously one of our largest markets, but Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, our Wheelbase product operates in more countries because it's a bit easier to expand that. But then the marketplace quickly follows with that. So yeah, global in nature.
Got it. Cool. So we're going to jump into questions here in a second. I think we have a few here. But before we do, so you have some really incredible experience, and when it comes to marketplaces, and I wanted to see if you had any kind of tips for early stage marketplace founders here that might be helpful.
Yeah, I do a few board meetings my time. And one slide I really like to lead off with is just reminding people, and I think this is really important through the fundraising stage, is like, what type of marketplace are you? And I know this sounds really basic, but I think if you can set the parameters for people to how to mentally think about your marketplace before you talk to them about it, it's a much more, I think, fruitful conversation. And so the things I would say is like, what part of it, trying to identify as you talk about your marketplace, like what type of marketplace is it? Is it a highly frequent marketplace? Is it an infrequent purchase marketplace? So let's take two examples. Like Zillow is a marketplace, highly infrequent, right? Food delivery, highly frequent, right? RV rentals, vacation rentals, middle frequency trending towards infrequent, because people have 2 weeks of vacation a year and are probably not going to use all of it for going on one vacation. So that is a business that has on the demand side infrequent usage, like yearly usage, but on the supply side, high utilization, right? So high frequency. And so as you think about and describe your business, I would try and make it very clear for people how to think about it. And that way you can kind of have nice mental models for people. So that would be some advice I would say. And then I also think as you identify that, it also kind of dictates your growth strategy, right? Highly infrequent businesses require you to have very large surface areas. So things Zillow, one of the reasons they focus so much on SEO is because the long tail of search is where the conversions happen, right? And so they need to capture as much of the infrequent transactions as humanly possible. So footprint is really important, right? They need to carpet the internet. But then you take Uber, for example, they do obviously do things in search and things like that, but that's highly like frequent transactions. And so what their main thing is like get the app in people's hands and on their phone to use it, right? And so they're willing to pay a lot for acquisition in the moment to get it going. And so I think overall, if you can kind of just help kind of identify that, you can easily set the tone as you talk to other people about your business, which I think is the most important thing for founders.
Yeah, that's a really great point. It actually kind of comes up quite frequently here in the community as far as like I would say like on a spectrum of frequency with the marketplaces and whatnot. So how would you kind of where would you say that Outdoorsy falls on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have users that like to use it a lot, so they use it multiple times a year. They use weekends and things like that. But more frequently, we see people taking week-long trips, right? And so that's more of a yearly transaction from that perspective, which is great. Means we make quite a bit of money up front, right? But also means our acquisition strategy is has to be around making money on the first transaction from people, and so profitability on the first transaction is something that is very key to the business. If you have a higher frequency business, I see Colin here from Neighbor, they have a reoccurring revenue model, so it's a bit different. Obviously you can be profitable in the first transaction too, but the point being is you amortize costs over time a bit differently, and so you think about your acquisition strategy differently. So I just really think hard about that, because I think it can actually be fairly obvious maybe in hindsight, but as you work through that process of the nature of your business, what your growth and acquisition strategy should be, and also your monetization models.
Yeah, no, that's really great. So that might be a good little highlight clip for us there. So awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining in, by the way, Colton.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks, Colin. Colin and I have similar names,
Yeah.
but wanted to get some learnings from him and Outdoorsy.
Yeah. So hey, we're actually we're rolling right into the group questions. So do you have any questions? And we're gonna put you on the spot.
Well, it was interesting to hear about. I kind of just joined in the middle of the discussion about Roamly and the insurance product. Neighbor has recently rolled out property protection plans that is, a guarantee product that Neighbor underwrites ourselves. And so, I'd love to hear, if you didn't already talk about this, maybe the idea of a little bit more insight around add-ons in general, and kind of where that fits into the life cycle, to your, as you've been speaking to a lot of these early stage marketplaces. How did that progress at Outdoorsy? Not just the insurance product, but other add-ons in general. How soon did that come? And how did you think about that compared to, relative to your earlier point about getting profitability early on?
Yeah, So I think, just one clarification, profitability early in the business, obviously there's like a nice inflection point there where you should care about it versus focus on it. And I think one of the other things though is really important in marketplaces is if you have a true moat, right, you have pricing power, right? And so I think that's something to test and learn early is like, can you raise prices and still, fulfill the demand and supply sides of the business? And if you can, the reason that's important is that margin on transactions is one of the greatest growth levers, right? Like the more money you can make per transaction, the faster you can grow, while balancing not charging so much such that, you don't have, volume of transactions, which is also important. And so I think that's an important area to think about. And that's where add-ons can be really interesting, right? The preponderance of transactions are not going to add on, right? It's always going to be in some low percentage, depending on what it is, but there's going to be some add-on percentage that's going to be whatever, 1 to 10, 20%, 30% maybe. And so what that does is it allows you to essentially increase your margin and therefore potentially, juice your growth as well, as you try to target margins and things like that. So I think where you want to add it in is really like at the phase where you're starting to focus on unit economics, right? I think like moving towards very profitable unit economics, I think early on you can figure out that you can do it and that's important, right? But then there's economies of scale that need to be figured out before you can get to really like great contribution margin. Like for example, like I don't recommend people renegotiating their Stripe contract when they're small, right? Like get bigger, then renegotiate it. And that'll have huge returns of scale for your contribution margin, but it's just not really effective until you're big, right? And it's also one of the things is that with add-ons and things like that, most partners may not want to work with you if you're not that big yet, right? And so I think there's a fine line that you got to figure out is where you're big enough for people to be interested to do things with you, and also large enough scale to do it where it's meaningful. Doing it too early, I think, is great to, too early, meaning that you can prove out that it works, but it isn't necessarily meaningful to your business. And I think that's the art there is where is it like become meaningful in your large enough scale such that it's great. I think, for example, though, you're talking about doing some kind of self-insured retention here, right? Like some guarantee that you guys are doing. I think those are great in marketplaces. Personally, they make a lot of sense. They can be a little expensive from the capital perspective because you may use investor capital, but they really align incentives, right? You as the business are going to be like very hawkish on making sure that isn't going to be unprofitable for you, but it also drives liquidity in the marketplace and aligns you with your customers. So I think those value adds where they can potentially be like low cost and it isn't requiring the demand side of the business just to buy more stuff, right? I think those are the kind of add-ons that like I think get really interesting. Like for example, Outdoorsy provides insurance, right? But we also within our insurance provide roadside assistance. That is an additional cost, but we've kind of factored that in, and it has the positive benefits of lowering claims, right? From the insurance side because it's roadside assistance, so it does things that insurance doesn't do, but also is kind of preventative in nature. And so as you think about these add-ons, there's probably different ways to like integrate them, right? And try and figure out the right flavor of doing that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Hey, so actually I want to learn a little bit more about that. So you mentioned the roadside assistance, right? As like an add-on. At what, to kind of like, piggyback off the question, at what point in time did you offer that?
We offered that very early on. Again, your demand side, like especially the travelers, are going to tell you what they want, right? They're going to give you feedback early and often. And if you can easily provide them something that they want as part of the transaction, then do it, right? I think, in the case of Neighbor, it's very similar to Outdoorsy. Like, you're giving some of your own stuff or you're on the property side and you want to protect it. Like, being able to get that reassurance and be able to purchase it or get it provided within your cost structure is like important for liquidity, right? And so roadside assistance was also like important on the demand side because people were like, I don't know how to drive an RV. This is the first time I've ever taken it out. It's going to be exciting and fun for my family, but what if it breaks down? I don't know what to do, right? I personally, I don't, if my car broke down, I don't even know what I would do. But the point being is that providing those trust pieces, people are happy to pay for them if they know they're going to guarantee a great experience.
Yeah, certainly. No, I mean, it would be a no-brainer. I would definitely need that myself too. So wouldn't know where to start if something happened and I had an RV. So, well, hey, Matt, did you want to come on? The question?
I do. Hey, thank you so much, Colin.
Yeah.
Awesome information. I'm Matt with Gear Focus. We're a photo and video marketplace for the 50 million plus creators that now exist. And we want to start offering insurance for the number one thing that we are running up against is that insurance carriers don't want to insure used gear.
Yeah.
But it is the number one feedback from our users of what added value we could give for a membership model. One of the biggest things that we could give them is insurance. And the reason is PPA, Professional Photographer Association, is like one of the only places other than your own State Farm or your own personal home insurance that offers insurance for camera gear. So any suggestions of like paths to go down, because it was dead end right out of the gate.
We've explored this with Outdoorsy as well. Like people want to add on their kayak or canoe or whatever it may be to the rental, right? A generator, for example, high value but highly useful piece for the rental. That typically, like the security deposit, right, is how we've handled a lot of this. And what is a security deposit, right? It's self-insured, right? It's like basically collateral-based insurance. And so I think as you think about it, like, don't necessarily think you need an insurance company to do what you want to do, right? Okay. Like one of the better, like best use cases, right, of capital is using your capital to provide essentially a backstop for your business to be successful. Now, as it gets to scale, right, like that may be enough capital that it's inefficient for you to provide it, right? And then that's where you may want to talk to people about providing that. But I think in early stages, it sounds crazy, self-insuring things, right, is actually a very efficient way for you to do it, right? And obviously you're going to hit a lot of snags doing that, just in terms of what are your underwriting guidelines? Like you're not an insurance professional, right? So I think talking to people and learning about that space. But ultimately, that doesn't require like insurance, like in spaces that there's not required, right, by law, like you don't necessarily need it, right? Like for cars, it's state mandated. You have to have insurance, right? So that's a different problem where you do need to work with an insurance company that's licensed. But for what you're talking about, you don't necessarily need an insurance partner, right?
Right. Great point.
And so I would just think about how do you do it yourself, right? And I'm not like saying put all your capital at risk and figure that out, but I think figure out what is the like enough, like, is it like, is the average claim going to be $20? Is it going to be $200? Is it, what is it? And then you can kind of work backwards and model like essentially what you can provide and or charge for it, right? And you can share the cost. You can, there's many different ways to handle it, right? And I think insurance is all about providing liquidity, right? So that people will do more risky things. And so I think that's how you should think about investing in your supply side, right? Is how do you help them be successful by using your capital or the revenue from the business and float? Like, there's many different ways to handle it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that feedback. Yeah.
And I would say for anyone in marketplaces thinking about insurance and wanting to go deeper on it, Roamly does more than just provide RV insurance. We actually, I think, are full service for the sharing economy. So we are happy to chat with you and help design solutions. So email me, colin@roamly.com, and we're happy to get conversation going and talk further about it.
Get ready for a bunch of emails.
No, I mean, seriously, I mean, like embedding insurance is something that we've become very good at with Outdoorsy Wheelbase. Like, so Wheelbase, for example, is a SaaS software, right? We provide the insurance into Wheelbase. that every business on Wheelbase uses. They, pay on a per day model, and this is something we pioneered. And so over time, we have gone on the indexing of high usage of insurance company to do it to lower usage of insurance company because we figured out the numbers ourselves, right? And we, as a business, it's now a moat for us and a profit center for us because we figured out insurance, right? We know the average claim amount and what we can charge. And if there's profit in that, now we have profitability in the business from one of our main kind of cost centers previously.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Certainly. Yeah, well, we have a lot of founders in the community that have messaged me about that and are posting about it. So that'll be super helpful for them to be able to reach out. So appreciate it. Actually, looks like Shane, did you want to jump on?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hey, Colin.
Oh, man.
I'll give you an easy one to start. I have quite a few questions, but I'll start with an easy one. I could assume that the pandemic had some effects on Outdoorsy's marketplace. Curious if you could speak a little bit to the challenges or learnings as kind of the demand side of things shifted during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's a good question. So a big part of travel, March 3 years ago now, feels like yesterday, but it was pretty far away now. Basically, travel came to a halt, right? And the expectation was that everything was going to cancel, right? And I think one of the interesting things that we identified early and did well was that, cancellations don't have to be binary, right? They don't have to be like we refund everyone, right? You can actually offer for people to have a credit and use it later, right? And so I think as you think about human behavior, people are scared in the moment. This is like the, buy the fear, sell the news type of psychology, right? Is that it also applies in this space, right? Like cancellation, for example, right? Like people are just fearful, so they're going to get rid of it. But you can also harness that and say, hey, we'll give you a bonus of, credit essentially to move it forward in the future. Business doesn't lose float. They will eventually take a vacation, it's a positive piece of it. And so as I think that was just an interesting use case of taking, demand changes and actually turning it into a positive. As you'll notice, most of my, as I think about the world, is how do you take a certain problem or a thorn and turn it into a positive, right? And demand changed a lot, right? I mean, people basically couldn't fly or didn't want to fly and didn't want to stay in hotels. And so the only option to go visit friends, family, do things was to drive locally. And so a lot of what we saw change was people going to drive markets, right? People weren't, and we also saw a deterioration in the business of people flying to big cities to go on RV trips. So a lot of people used to fly, like Europeans would fly to Denver, rent it, and go to the national parks. Obviously that changed, right? And so drive markets have changed a lot, right? And you've seen this with vacation rentals as well, is that more and more people are trying to do things locally, right? And that's just a behavior change that's happened. Obviously, right now, more and more people are flying and doing things. Don't try and book a hotel right now. It's pretty nuts. Also spring break. But the point being is that, people want to get outside, and that's changed significantly. I think people are reconnecting and really wanting to do that more and more often. Also, people love those van life photos of someone's feet out the back of a van with the beach, it's hot right now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good question. Hey, Benjamin, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks, Colin. I really, really love the chat. So I'm building Gecko, which is pretty much like Amazon marketplace for rentals. So what we're building is a SaaS enabled marketplace that's more a B2C. So we provide the CRM, the instant booking system, and security and insurance for our supply side, being rental businesses. So as you can imagine, and I believe you guys would face this at Outdoorsy, there's certain rental businesses that are earning like say $20,000 a year, so they're just sort of starting out, and then there are other rental businesses that are $2 million plus a year. And as you can imagine, right, the features that you're building are completely different for a tier 1 versus a tier 5. So we're sort of working out at the moment is how do we prioritize, I guess, between, I guess, the things that are within, tier 5, tier 4, tier 3, tier 2, and what I guess would you recommend is the best way to work out whether we should put this feature that would help out a tier 3 rental business, but wouldn't help so much of a tier 4 or tier 5 rental business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple core tenets I would think about as an early stage startup. One, most often people like see the bright lights of, if I get this big customer, we're going to be super successful, right? That is like a fallacy. Like maybe there's people that it works for, but often not, getting a big customer they're going to take over your roadmap. So I would avoid those at all costs, because what marketplaces are great at are aggregating disparate supply, right? Like people that are already huge and large, like they've already aggregated and they're large, right? For a reason. And so yes, you could get that deal and it could be life-changing for your business. More often than not, it's more of a logo and not very meaningful in revenue, because they'll negotiate you down anyway. So what I would say, and the other tenet I would say, is that most marketplaces start disparate, but then return to the power seller, right? Like at the end of the day, people professionalize over time. And so as you think about that, figure out where is the preponderance of supply that needs to be connected into demand, right? And how do you, connect that? Because that's the spot where you drive value and you make more money, right? Because you're doing it. The bigger guys probably don't need your business, right? And they probably don't want to pay their margin to you, and you probably make less money per transaction. And so as you start to think about that, right, balance everything as always, but I would figure out where you can like drive the most, like eventually margin and revenue, and also go after things that people don't already have, like that supply, because uniqueness of supply is also really important.
Awesome. That's a good question. Yeah. And I think it's a quite common one. So,
and one last thing is, like, I would try and do features that cut across the most people, right? Like it, assuming that it is also drives the most revenue or, upside for the business.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're almost out of time here, but those are definitely some great questions from the group. Looks like we have one more. And Colton posted it in the chat here, so I want to see if we can get to that really quick. But he was asking if you can share the adoption rates for insurance on the demand side of Outdoorsy.
Yeah. So assuming you're talking during the rental period, it's like near 100%. Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, the only scenario is where the supply side provides its own insurance, which most people don't want to have to go through the hassle of doing, and probably can't get a better deal than what we can provide too, right? So there's a certain inconvenience factor, right? It's all factored in. So I think just like, what is the learning there, right? If you can make it as seamless as possible at the point of sale for doing these things, people are going to generally adopt something, allow the marketplace to do something for them and take that value, as long as they don't have to do it. So anyway, we should follow up, and I want to hear more about what you guys are doing on insurance now.
Yeah. One last question that I think might be relevant for everyone here is, why did you guys think about it as an actual insurance product rather than more of a guarantee?
So, great question. Like I said, there's a regulatory piece here that requires insurance for moving vehicles, like things with an engine. So that's just part of it. But there's also like, and that's for liability specifically in auto, right? So that technically has to be an insurance product, right? Now, physical damage, kind of where you guys are dealing in, right, isn't required by law to have insurance, right? It's actually kind of additional coverage. And so that's where you can start to do more things that are like not necessarily insurance, they're a guarantee, right? What people often call self-insured retention, right? You're retaining the risk under a certain amount, right? You may have a backstop with it or something like that, or you might have a deductible. And so as you think, if your business is purely physical damage based, that's where you can do interesting guarantees. If you have liability, you're going to have to play with traditional insurance, right? Probably just because the loss limits are going to be high, right? Like just the low frequency, high severity. Physical damage, typically higher frequency, lower severity, right? In terms of cost. And so I think it really just depends on your business, right? Like what's the, like, are you dealing with people? And if you're dealing with people, then inherently it means liability, right? And that can be a higher cost, and also like, cataclysmic things can happen. And so I would say in that case, you should never risk your balance sheet. You should be using someone as a partner in that. But if you're talking about physical damage and it's bounded, like you can cover up to X amount and that amount and you can really own it, then I think it's, it can be really powerful to, doing your own kind of guarantee.
Well, that was a great way to wrap things up. And we really appreciate, taking the time to join us and sharing all your awesome experience, with this here, Colin. So we went kind of deep on the insurance a little bit. So, last question I had for you to kind of wrap things up though, if you were to go back to, when you first got into marketplaces, or, maybe when you first joined Outdoorsy, what would you tell yourself about them?
Oh man. I'm an economist at heart, so marketplaces make a ton of sense to me. They're interesting. I think kind of what I provided earlier, I think everyone should try and do a rubric of like describing their marketplace in very basic terms, like demand and supply side, frequency, average order value, monetization model, growth strategy, and just try and make that like a little table and really try to say, what marketplace are you? Like, are you a two-sided marketplace? Are you an n-sided marketplace? And really try and, I know this sounds really basic, but I think most people won't go through the time and effort to make a very small table, right? Like, I think we're all good at the elevator pitch of like what I am, but until you put it in those stark terms, it's really hard to do logical thinking on it. So
sounds like I need to make that as a small guide or kind of resource for us here. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll send you a little gridded table that I have, but it's like, it's very basic, right? And like, it's not meant to be some strict, hard and fast thing, but it's like helps you write down exactly what you're thinking and then also get feedback on it.
Yeah, that'd be great if you can send it over. I'll shoot you a note after. So, well, cool. Last but not least, so time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at?
My Twitter, although I was looking at how many followers I have, that's pretty abysmal, guys. So if anyone could help me following Colin Gardiner on Twitter, I mean, honestly, probably the best place is to email me. I'm a heads down kind of guy, and usually playing with my kids. So
yeah, well, expect a few more new marketplace followers. So
yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks again for taking the time to join us. This was really great and definitely a fun chat. So, and thanks everyone for the great questions. So looks like we had some familiar faces on today.